because I do 1,300 crunches and sit-ups 4 times a week.
What's a dose? Can you translate for us?
Winner of the gold medal and the champion golfer of the year is Ernie Els.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I said to Carl, we're basically swimming around in the unknown, and I thought that could be quite an amusing thing to do with the latest developments. I've tried to avoid listening to too many other opinions on it. What's your initial reaction from the news yesterday?
Yeah, I think this is going to be me speaking on something that I'm way out of my depth on.
The law?
American anti-competitive law. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm
antitrust.
I'm an expert, but I'll give it a crack at just sort of my initial takes, and I have read a bit and listened to a bit. But obviously there's so much out there already in terms of opinions, and everyone will have an opinion on this one way or another. But I think the biggest thing that I maybe want to clarify at the beginning is the difference in is this a merger? I mean, everything I read talks about it as a merger of LIV and PGA, but then sort of also listening to some other pods and reading some other news, it's more sort of a framework agreement. It's a handshake. It's your agreement to agree situation, and I don't think it's going to be a merger per se. It's the creation of a new entity. So I think mergers may be a bit misconstrued and is a bit
a bit of a clickbait. Most of those headlines that were put out were very kind of clickbaity. And I felt like when I saw it, I was like, it's just another one of these like fake accounts. Because some of them were sort of saying, the PGA is joining LIV, and there's a lot of bad media reporting, I think, on it. My understanding is that exactly what you say. This is a negotiated settlement, basically, on between all the parties, and an agreement that essentially this new entity will be created. And there were obviously some T's and C's around how it will be created in terms of the makeup of the board and all of that. But that the tours, and this is kind of the big question mark, certainly the PGA Tour and the DP World Tour will just, are going to continue as normal. Now, whether LIV is going to just continue as normal, or whether, that kind of experiment is over and those players just filter back into the other tours, and LIV becomes the team, some sort of team tournament, which happens, I don't know, at a different time of year. I guess that's kind of the big question mark. And honestly, that's what a lot of people were calling for a long time ago, sort of even pre-LIV, was some kind of more interesting off-season team competition. So that I guess that's the question mark. But in terms of merging, I don't think that that's not happening. It seems to be that they're merging their commercial operations. Yeah. So the interests are merging, merging, but the actual tours, I think, are going to continue to operate. Allegedly.
So, Terrence, if I can ask you a question, who comes out of this looking the best, and who comes out looking the worst?
That's a good question. I was pretty taken aback by the news, but then I kind of digested it a little bit last night. I read a few things, and this morning I tried to really take a step back from, I guess, some of the emotive stuff that's gone around, and to look at how this would have played out to get to this point. Because I think a lot of people there's a lot of people that are very surprised, because it seemed as though the PGA Tour had sort of managed to fight off LIV to some degree, and we're kind of on the up. And I think a lot of people are surprised as to why they would make this move, including it seems like all of the players. And I think there's obviously some cold hard realities around the law and the corporate world that essentially always it kind of rules the roost in terms of how the world functions. And I think ultimately that's kind of what's happened in the background here. I think that the interesting thing with golf is that there's so much emotion thrown into it because you've got essentially all of the players are like the assets of all of these businesses, but they're not like quiet assets. You know, they've all got emotions and opinions and Twitter handles, and you've got polarization happening on both sides. But I mean, ultimately, when you step back, I think what's happened is just sort of classic kind of corporate maneuvering over a period of like 12 to 18 months. That's and this is kind of where we've ended up. So to answer your question, I think that it depends in which view you're looking at. I think that obviously the Saudis, as in PIF, are big winners here.
I mean, I just think of the biggest losers on both sides. I mean, Greg Norman and Rory McIlroy, who have pretty much sold themselves for the two entities, have like seems like they've been completely excluded from this, and they've sort of put their reputations on the line for it, just to ultimately be sidelined when the final decision gets made. I mean, Rory must. Yes, if I was Rory, I would be furious. I don't dig Greg Norman, but I would also be furious if I was Greg Norman. Can you believe it? I mean, those two in particular, who are the mouthpieces for LIV and PGA respectively. I mean, Jay Monahan, he wasn't really the sort of taking the hard questions and sort of giving the sound bites, just as much as the sort of the PIF guys weren't the guys giving the opinions and the sound bites. You know, it was Greg Norman and Rory McIlroy basically going at each other, and were the mouthpieces of these two tours. And then it seems like neither of them are aware of this decision, and it's just that for me is absolutely mind blowing.
Yeah, it is, and that's why I say, I think this is ultimately what's happened is, what rules the world is sort of corporate and legal maneuvering, and I think that's what's been on display for the last sort of 12 to 15 months behind the scenes. And Greg Norman and McIlroy are all just these emotional kind of sideshows.
But they bid players, Terrence, and I mean the thing is, again, just shows the difference between being immensely rich and being the businessman. And I think there is a bit of a difference in the two, where you can see in the back the businessmen are speaking, and in the front the immensely rich businessmen in inverted commas are like, this is the way we should do it, and the rest of it. And they're like, okay, thanks, you're a pawn in our bigger chess game. And I think that you have to look at the geopolitics involved as well. There's so many ties to Saudi Arabia and the money that they've got and the political power that they wield in the world, that I don't think, I think there must have been some pressure from a governmental level to get this thing over the line. Yeah,
I mean, I think so. If I look at if I just look at it in like three categories, like the PIF, I think for them it's obviously a win. They wanted to have high level involvement in professional golf, and they have now managed to become like a key partner in what is essentially like a World Golf Incorporated, whatever it's going to be called. That's essentially. So LIV, I think, has been a very costly kind of prototype for getting them there. But I think more kind of, and this is more the behind the scenes stuff, is I think more important was the fact that they had basically bottomless cash to fight this antitrust case and any other potential lawsuits. And obviously there was some uncertainty around the PGA Tour's case there, I guess. And it was, and as you know, it was probably just going to get tied up in the courts for years and just drain the PGA Tour of dollars. So they had that. I mean, they're just the size of PIF is just mind blowing. They literally have something like $600 or $700 billion of assets under their management. So, that was ultimately it was just a tidal wave that was going to be very difficult for them to fight off. And then I look at when I step back and you look at Jay Monahan, there's two parts to him which I think are kind of interesting. Okay, the one is, and so I would say, was he a winner or a loser? I think probably both. I think as kind of a corporate mover shaker, I think he's probably actually got a very good result. If you look at where they were this time last year versus this deal that he's brokered now, what the details of that are going to be, is probably yet to be decided. But if you think about it, this time last year they were basically bleeding players. It was roundabout now when every second day there was like a new guy who was leaving, and they were top players. He managed to kind of slowly chuck the anchor out on that and slow that down and find a couple of cheerleaders for the PGA Tour, and those are the Rorys and the Rahms and Justin Thomas and he basically threw them in the front, as you say, put the microphones in front of them, and got them to eventually rally all the other players to kind of not leave. And then they kind of they announced this new schedule and having all the best players playing together, whatever. So they kind of shored up their product, because let me tell you, if they hadn't managed to do that, the tour would have essentially been over. It would have been a couple of, I'm sure the events would have carried on, but you would have had it would have become basically like the DP World Tour. You would have had all the best players playing at LIV, and it would have completely lost it. So, on that sense, he did a really good job in showing it up, because essentially it was a war basically that was going on. And I think what he did was basically bought them time to, or he used all of that time to basically buy themselves some leverage. I guess they must have known once this antitrust case was brought forward, and that it was going to be just this very long, protracted, legal battle, that they probably were going to have to have some sort of settlement. And this is where I'd be interested to get your take. But that's always kind of the default advice, isn't it? In these scenarios, is it's
on legal fees, and you're probably going to have to be asked some really awkward questions and have to discover some very awkward documents.
Yeah, and the best way. The best way to settle is to have some sort of leverage. When you negotiate, you need something. And so I think all that time, I think Jay Monahan bought them some leverage, and now he's negotiated this. Essentially, from what I understand, they've got a majority stake in this new enterprise. I think the other important thing to remember is that that they had promised this massive new PGA Tour they'd boosted all the prize money and that, but it's literally in the middle of a financial crisis in particularly in the Western world. There's not a lot of free cash flow cruising around, and they now have this.
Can I just come in there, because you talk about Jay Monahan leveraging, and I think there's a point that shoehorns in quite nicely there. He leveraged his position based on being, the word I think that's been thrown, is duplicitous to his own play. So he's kept the best players at the PGA Tour with this narrative of the legacy and don't take that dirty money. So, they've all got in the room. They said, we need to take control of this tour, and, the history behind it and the rest of it. People like Hideki Matsuyama stayed, Cam Young stayed, obviously Rory and Justin Thomas and Spieth, and all of those guys stayed, particularly the international guys. And that created, I would imagine, some of that leverage that Jay Monahan had. Now, what did they forego in terms of the deals that they were probably offered by LIV, so that Jay Monahan could broker this $1 billion deal for everyone else? Now, sure, they might be martyrs in the end to say, well, we didn't take the money so that everyone could ultimately benefit. But I would be pissed off if I were those guys. Hideki Matsuyama, he could have been one of the richest dogs on the planet. That's how much, allegedly they were offering him and to get into that market. And now what? Now he gets a share potentially of some of the commercial interests. I hope they can cut him in on some deal there, because I feel like Hideki in particular has been properly screwed over.
Yeah, so I mean, essentially, and this is why I said Jay Monahan is a winner and a loser. So I think he won if you see him as a corporate mover and shaker. I think he manipulated his assets. Like when I say assets, I really mean the players, as best he could to get them into this position. Okay, but so now when I say as a loser, as the tour commissioner / player representative, like I don't think he's going to keep his job. Unfortunately, as I say, all those like assets of his, they all have thoughts and feelings, and he's 100% manipulated. Well, he has shored them up through a lot of talk and manipulation to basically prop up. That was what propped up the tour. Was those guys not leaving was basically what saved the tour, and together with like what sounds like absolutely no communication on, especially in the beginning part of LIV, and then obviously now this part now, it seems like it was all done without any player communication at all. So I think he's completely lost the room in terms of the players. I can't imagine that he would stay on as the PGA Tour sort of commissioner, but possibly now maybe he will move into like sort of it sounds like he is becoming the CEO of this sort of World Golf Inc. But and I guess the PGA Tour will have another commissioner.
But Terrence, you got your assets of this new commercial entity that he's now appointed himself as the CEO of. I mean, I imagine he's going to become immensely rich as a result of that as well. If he's not already, probably is already immensely rich.
100%.
But how on earth has he managed to get himself that position if it all goes through? I mean, if I were the players, I'd be saying there's no chance that you're benefiting off this, personally.
Yeah, and that's what I don't really understand is how the PGA Tour can operate, like how their board structure works, that they could have kind of brokered this deal without player inputs is what it seems like. But obviously they've legally been able to do that without having player buy-in. So I hear you, but it's look, ultimately, Jacques, in the long run, and the question obviously for a lot of players, particularly the American players, is the source of the Saudi money, and I guess all of those players individually will have to take decisions around how they're going to answer that. But at the end of the day, the Saudis are basically investing in every single sport like there is in the world. I mean, they're in Formula One, they're in soccer, they're apparently investing in NBA teams in America. They are, the ladies' golf. So it's a tidal wave that was never really gonna be stopped. And I think for those players now, they've managed to maintain that they're going to be seriously pissed off with Monahan. And that's why I think that he's probably gone as the PGA Tour commissioner. But he's just stepping up into this, this new for-profit CEO role, which has probably got like triple the pay, So, and you'd have to think that ultimately in the long run, this is going to benefit the PGA Tour players as well, because it's going to have the Saudi money coming in for prize funds and that. So I think that they're probably all massively, massively pissed off. And he probably knew that was a risk to what he was going to do. But, it's one of those things where in 10 years' time, those players will probably go, well, we hated that guy for doing that, but, we ended up making 200 or 300 times more than what we might have had the tours been split. I don't know.
I think some of the sort of middle to lower range players will feel that way. But I mean, remember that those top players, the stars, turned down multi-million dollar deals based on that narrative. And 10 years, they're probably not going to be around anymore. But again, they've essentially unknowingly sacrificed themselves for the tour. And it's one thing to go in there with open eyes to say, this is a strategy, you guys stay here for the benefit of the future of the tour and forego millions. And, that's why I said, I hope he is able to cut a deal with those stars who turned down, the huge sums, the signing on fees with LIV. Because ultimately they are losers. The stars that stayed at the stars that stayed at the PGA Tour come out as the biggest losers, I think.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think there's a couple of categories of those players. So actually, so you've obviously got the guys who are like dead set loyal, like the Rorys and that. And look, I don't know whether they will come out as complete losers. I think they took a very firm stance, and I think they're going to make a shitload of money probably in the next 4 and 5 years to probably make up for that. I think the players that are going to be like the most pissed off are the guys who like were very, very close to leaving. So like your Patrick Cantlays and your like Will Zalatoris and Justin Rose, Ricky Fowler, like those guys were all publicly said that they like sort of were like had offers in front of them, and they were kind of convinced by like the Rorys and the Jay Monahans to like stay and whatever. I think those guys are going to be like super aggrieved, and they're going to want some dollars in their bank accounts, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and that's the only way I can see it happening. And again, they will never get the dollars in their bank account than what they were offered.
Probably not. No, I think that they will be ultimately probably the losers in the history books. They'll go down as the losers. But yeah, losers is a it's a strong word considering that those guys are probably going to have probably going to be millionaires.
Yeah, I was going to say let's call them collateral damage that still are handsomely paid. But what are your thoughts on Keith Pelly and the DP World Tour? I mean, they just seem to be coming along for the ride wherever the PGA Tour goes.
I think that this saves them massively. Like I think the DP World Tour was on track to become like really like the third or fourth tour, like ranked tour on globally, and I don't know really what's going to happen with LIV, like as we know it now. But as I say, my suspicions are that that it might just become a sort of a team type tour. And I think that the DP World Tour now will be in a position to sort of almost become the legitimate like first division tour. So yeah, the European Tour were sort of having. They had warm relationships with the Saudis before LIV. They had some tournaments in Saudi and that. So I just don't think they were on board with a separate tour. I think they wanted the investment from the Saudis. And I think that they weren't on board with the actual LIV tour. But so yeah, I think for them it's probably in the long run it's definitely a win.
And maybe just now to really get you paddling out to unknown waters, how is this ultimately going to affect what we get in South Africa?
Well, I was thinking about that last night actually, and I was thinking, well, maybe you're going to have this group of players that's like just so pissed off with the whole like structure and that, and like maybe there's an opportunity for like another like rebel tour, and maybe the Sunshine Tour and like the Australian Tour can like be that guy, maybe they can like take in the guys who like don't want to play for Saudi money, and maybe we can have this like epic like Southern Hemisphere like tour, with some really top players. Very unlikely scenario, but no, look, and I obviously a world golf tour type thing is kind of what all South African players and fans have probably wanted for the longest time, right? So, I mean, the DP tour is basically, it is a worldish tour, and I guess in the long run, this can only be good in terms of the dollars for South African players.
Yeah, look, I also think, maybe they'll be true to their word in terms of having a global tour in inverted commas. And part of it will be that this off-season will be a bit of if there's the team aspect to it and PGA Tour and everyone have this commercial interest, it will turn into this Formula One traveling circus sort of thing where you have, where you don't have 7 events in the USA, but the team events, you might have 1 or 2 in the USA, and then sure, you'll have 1 or 2 in the Middle East. But then you can go to Australia and South Africa and Europe and, Japan, and we get a sort of Formula One type of team event in the off season. I think that's the best case scenario that we would watch. I don't know if the franchises would stay the same. I think Rory McIlroy will never, ever, ever be playing for the Ironheads or the Cleeks, even if there is a stake. But I would be saying that the guys who want to earn a big paycheck at the end of the year to play in these team events would just be going around the world playing those team events for a big paycheck, and hopefully South Africa gets one of those.
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective. I think that would be, and that was kind of what we were calling for with LIV, right? We were saying get a LIV tournament here, and if LIV is now just a team tournament, and we also have the best players from the PGA Tour, then let's get a team event in South Africa. That would be that's probably best case scenario, along with some of the top level DP World Tour events. That's probably about as kind of good as it's going to get. Unfortunately, we're still like a little island, tiny little island when it comes to golf. So I think that the one positive thing is, hopefully guys like, Louis, I don't know if he's still got his heart in it, but maybe some of those guys might be able to make their way back into more competitive golf. Not sure. I just wanted to say something about the LIV players. I think that obviously a lot of them are going to be kind of marching around feeling very vindicated about the decisions they've made. So I think obviously financially they will, but I think there's 2 kind of categories of LIV players. You've had the very outspoken ones who've kind of burnt their bridges behind them as they've left, and I'm thinking here of like Sergio Garcia, Westy, Phil Mickelson, Taylor Gooch. I think those guys will remain massively polarizing, and like they're going to claim that they were right in leaving, and maybe financially they made a very good decisions. But I think that people have long memories, and I think that like if someone like Sergio thinks he's going to return to the DP World Tour, I think he'll find there's going to be a lot of roadblocks put in front of him based on like just his like behavior in leaving. And then you've had the guys who've gone very quietly, and like Louis Oosthuizen, I think Dustin Johnson, Brooks Koepka, they've just sort of said, look, it was a business decision. And obviously for them, it's a hugely good result. I guess the question now is like, is the LIV Tour over? Like, is there LIV next year? Like, or do those guys just sort of go back home to where they came from? And then obviously a losing side for those players, especially the average players that left for LIV, is just kind of how they've lost world ranking points. That's obviously a big thing for the guys who sort of have major aspirations. It'll obviously take them a while to get back up those levels.
Yeah, I think a number of so to speak to a couple of the points, I'll start with the world ranking guys. If they're good enough, and I imagine they'll get those world ranking points. They'll get the opportunity to play more often in tournaments that have ranking points, and they'll, if they're as good as they are, they'll blow the fields away and start climbing back up again. I think it'll probably take a year or 2 for them to get back to where they were in terms of ranking points.
Yeah,
but they've got a lot of money in the bank to compensate them for that. In terms of the people that the LIV players that burnt their bridges on the way out, I mean, some of them you seem to feel like they were encouraged to do that, though. I mean, how much of that was of their own volition, going out there and absolutely tearing apart DP World Tour and the PGA? Do you think that was their own axe to grind, or were they encouraged to do that? And if that was the case, I mean, they're probably feeling similar to Rory in the sense that, hey guys, like you've paid me a lot of money to burn bridges, which I have, but I can't go back on those bridges now, even if. So again,
maybe
it just speaks to sort of how I imagine some of these guys feel like they've been left out in the cold.
Listen, there's a couple of them that I think that was just their normal personalities. I think of someone like Sergio, like he's just a child. I think that was, I don't think that was sponsored by the Saudis. So yeah, I don't know. It's so early in this whole thing. One of the interesting things about Rory is that I see, a lot of people saying he's got egg on his face, and he was the spokesperson for the PGA Tour, and to a certain extent, like he really was, and like if he wasn't aware of this, and this was done, I mean, we obviously haven't heard directly from him. Like if he wasn't aware, and this was done completely behind his back, then he's going to obviously feel massively aggrieved with Jay Monahan. But what's interesting is if you go back and you look at some of Rory's quotes from about this time last year, like just before the British Open. Like he basically said, look, he doesn't have an issue with the Saudis investing in golf. He said he thinks that in the long term, it's going to be really, really good for the game. He basically had a massive problem just with the fact that it was like a rival tour. And he said he would want to see that money invested inside like the existing structures. And as far as I can see, that's kind of what's happened, So, I think a lot of people are going to have a crack at Rory. But I think, I think he was kind of on board with this. I just don't think he loved this idea of this like exhibition tournament where half his like really top competitors were playing and not playing in these like historical kind of tournaments, So time will tell where it all falls out. It's very, very, very entertaining to watch, I must say.
Terrence, do you think the majors that have happened so far have had an influence on this? I mean, if you just look at the interest that's been generated, the competitiveness of the LIV players and the majors that have happened, do you think there was also pressure from the majors to say, hey, you guys need to figure out a way to make this work because otherwise we're going to have a bunch of exemption criteria for LIV players. And that whole exclusionary tactic that you've got with world ranking points is going to become relevant. Do you think that the performance of like Brooks and Phil among Bryson, among these last two majors pushed this somewhat?
Without a doubt, Jacques. Look, I think that they were very uneasy about the setup, regardless of how guys performed. But at the majors, but obviously having those great performances, it vindicated the point that it wasn't sustainable, the current model. And I think those guys are breathing a huge sigh of relief that they don't have to now like necessarily think their whole like exemption criteria. I see Augusta and the RNA put out like very brief press releases, basically saying we're fully on board with we think this is a great day for golf, and like basically the way I read them was like just a bit of a sigh of relief that things are going to settle down, and if anything, they come out as like massive winners again because the aura of the majors has like grown exponentially this year. So yeah, I think you could regard them as winners, and now they probably won't have to adjust all of their exemption categories and that. So yeah, I think they'll be stoked. I mean, the people I think that I feel for is sort of people like you, these like hardcore Majesticks fans who have like invested in the brand and probably have some like paraphernalia in the post, and it's looking like that might become they might actually become like collector's items, in the future.
Well, I'm hoping I'm going to hold on to it, and then in 20 years' time, I'll put them up on Amazon or eBay or something, and I'm sure everyone will say, "Who the hell are the Majesticks?"
I tell you what, there might be something too, just snapping up, all that paraphernalia. Listen, I'm obviously upset because the Crushers we had a lot of momentum behind them, and Paul Casey was, finding some form. We had Barn Lahiri, who was, he was really coming into his own. Bryson has recommitted, to his body and to stop eating so many protein shakes. So, I felt like we were really going to challenge the 4 aces this year. But look, I suppose that tournament is still alive. And maybe it even heightens LIV now even more. This is like maybe the last days of LIV as we know it.
I think it is, and I think you'll probably find this might be the last year, or maybe 2024. But again, I mean, if you announce that this is the last year of LIV, I mean, you sort of pull out unless you're just going to watch a spectacle, which I suppose that's what it is. You sort of pull the sting out of it. And maybe the biggest loser in all of this is Australia, who had a pretty epic event for 1 year.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I actually saw someone online saying the same thing, being like, okay, I guess there's no more LIV Adelaide. But wouldn't it be funny, like, if the Saudis just like cancelled LIV like now? They were just like, fuck, okay, cool, we're done with you guys. That was fun. That was a bit wild, like, sure, that was interesting. One of the points that guys were raising is that like LIV was an opportunity, again, sports washing working, to get a seat at the table, to rub shoulders with the top American businessmen, at these events and through their sponsorships, etc. That, I mean, maybe that's what it was, is to say, you guys are pawns in the bigger chess game, and it's worked. We've got what we wanted, so we're not going to spend another cent on LIV, which is losing money, because we've achieved our goal. It'd be so sick. It'd be so sick if they did that. They were just like, cool, Oaks, like, we're not going to do another tournament. So, like, you're free to go back. It would be wild. I don't know. Like, the part of it is like, when you look at all the players, like, there were a lot of players who clearly knew the whole thing was a bit of a joke, like, they weren't really into their franchises and that. But like, all these players who were like, oh, we're going to sell our franchise for like billions of dollars and like, I don't know, they all they're going to look a bit stupid now.
The Majesticks with 3 captains.
Oh, the Fireballs. It's yeah. Listen, I would love those teams to stick around. I just don't see Rory joining the cliques. That's all.
Yeah, I hear you. Terrence?
Well, listen, thanks, Jacques. I enjoyed that. We literally said on the last podcast that we had that we like not talking about professional golf.
Yeah.
We're like, we are not going to do another thing on professional golf. It's going to be courses, and anyway, here we are. But it's a pretty big day, I think. I think when you look back in 20 years, it'll be like the day then that world golf was formed.
A watershed moment. And I also think that yes, there's going to be some funny content that comes out of this as well. Just it's just going to be so interesting to see who says what and when and how this all shakes out, because it's just so public as well. And it's, oh man, people are going to be twisting themselves into pretzels to try and justify previous comments, and it's going to be fascinating.
It's going to be wild. I mean, as I say, golf is so unique that way that you like in any other sport, or like you have these individual teams who have like a very carefully crafted press release that they'll put out, In golf, you have like a guy and his phone and he's like on Twitter, and like he's and you've got like 100 of them, and they all like fight with each other, and it's like a real soap opera.
But also, like, what I love about golf is that at these professional tournaments, I mean, what other sport can you literally speak to the player while they're competing? I mean, at the Nedbank and at the SA Open that you've been at, I mean, if you're sitting there and the guys are waiting on the box, those players are interacting with you on the tee box, The guys can hear you when you shout stuff. If you're sitting at a rugby stadium and guys are shouting things from the stand, you're not going to hear a word unless, everyone's singing short or something. So, it's got a very personal slant to it in golf that guys are gonna shout things during tournaments. There's going to be a very personal reaction, and it's just going to, as I say, be absolutely fascinating to see how it plays out.
I saw that the guy who's the producer of Full Swing, the Netflix show, I saw him put a tweet out saying, like, you better believe that we had the cameras rolling when all of this news broke. So they were like they captured all of it on the ground. So, that full swing is going to be wild as well.
Well, I mean, it should be a standalone documentary. I mean, Full Swing will be wild, but they should make a standalone documentary of this.
Yeah. Chronicles. Must watch TV. Anyway, man, it's been fun. We'll see how it shakes out. I definitely want to chat about the US Open next week if the world settles down a bit in golf. But I think it's going to be a really cool US Open. The golf course they're playing, it looks amazing. It's going to suck from a time zone perspective, but might be some highlight stuff.
I was going to say the highlights reel is going to be epic. And Terrence, good luck on cutting out all of the cutting and pasting all of the aspects of this pod where we're having connection issues. Don't edit it much.
This is going to test my technical skills. That's for sure.
All right.
Anyway, thanks for coming on.
Yeah.
Tell Mr. Hoffman thanks for coming on as well. We appreciate his time.
Maybe his urgent matter was that he was representing Team Stinger in their renegotiation back into PGA Tour.
Well, maybe Discam have finally decided to come on board and be their sponsor, as they should have. So I can only hope that was the matter that kept him away. Yeah.
Either that or they're quickly trying to cancel all the property transfers that they had.
Cool. Chat to you later, Jacques. Thanks.
Cheers, man. Bye.